Today we're with Barry and Rick. And Chuck, why don't you take this one?
All right. First of all, I think you folks who are going to listen to this episode are going to have a real treat. These two guys I've known for a very long time, and we've become really, really good friends. These guys I've worked with research wise, and it's an honor and a pleasure to have these guys on the show. Just happy you guys are on the show with us. Barry, I'd like for you to start how you got interested in the subject and some of the sightings that you've had. And I know that you got Rick involved in all this, and you both have had quite a few sightings because of the job that you have. If you want to, just take it away from there.
Okay. Thanks, Chuck. This all started back when I was a kid. I started hearing strange noises down around our pond. We were pretty isolated where I grew up, and my parents and I didn't have any idea what those sounds were. And I always believed in Bigfoot. When I was about 13, I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film on the CBS Evening News. And I thought, boy, I'm glad those things are way up in the Northwest. And which, come to find out, was not true. But anyway, that rocked on for years. And then Rick and I used to hunt a lot. And in 1983, we were hunting up on some state land on Washita River, and we had things happen all that whole weekend. We never did see anything, but I told Rick, I said, I heard some Asians out down the deer trail I was watching one morning, and I heard a whistle, and then there was no wind, and all of a sudden I heard a huge tree snap. It sounded like a small caliber rifle just cracking and then breaking. And we also had the first evening, we were there camping out on the Washita, and I got there 3 hours before Rick, and I started clearing out area and breaking branches and so we could have a good fire. And while I did that, it started getting dark. And then all of a sudden, I felt like I was being watched. And I got the fire going, and it really got creepy. I felt like I was being watched from all around me. And I keep diesel in the back of my pickup. And I thought, well, I'm going to get this fire going good. So I went and got a quart of diesel out of the back. And the fire was pretty hot already. So I just threw that quart of diesel on it. And, of course, it just flared way up. And when it did, I heard all kinds of running through the brush around me. There was a lot of Johnson grass, and then something was just blasting through it in two different areas. I thought, that didn't sound like deer. I didn't expect deer to be up there watching me, but later on, Rick got there, and we were sitting down talking, and I noticed Rick kept looking over his shoulders. And I said, what's the matter? He said, I feel like we're being watched. And I said, thank goodness, because I've been feeling that for 3 hours. I said, I'm not alone in that. And there were several things happened. Rick saw some red eye shine that was way above the ground, and they were far apart, not like an owl or even a possum. Then we had this sweaty, skunky smell come through camp. It would come and go. I kept thinking, that's not a skunk. First of all, when a skunk sprays, it don't go away. And, of course, then the next day we started hearing the samurai chatter. Rick heard it, too. And that second night, it was almost evening. The sun was down, and all of a sudden, to the northeast of me, I hear this, what I thought at first was a guy calling cattle. It was a long, loop-sounding thing. And at first I thought, man, that guy's got a set of lungs. And then at the end of the call, he did that loop. And I thought, oh, that's ape. And I remember Paul Harvey, I listened to him every day on the tractor. And he talked about Bigfoot sightings in Roger Mills, Ellis, and Dewey County in Oklahoma. And so that made me think of that. And we went out and looked where I thought that the sound was coming from, that there was a guy calling cattle. We drive up there, and there's no cattle anywhere. So, okay. And
well, it sounded like a siren too, Barry, remember?
Yeah. We heard that
like
siren
a siren.
off in the distance. That's right. And we both were talking about there's no roads back in that area. It's just washed over the bottom, just dead sections. And we heard some more chatter and whistles the next day. And then the last night we were there, it was 3 a.m, and I was kind of halfway awake, and I heard this roar. Just never heard anything like it before. I grew up not far from the river, and I've heard mountain lions since I was 6 years old. And this put mountain lion to shame. It was just tremendous power, and it was close to camp. And it sounded very angry. And what it reminded me of is like a combination of an upset African lion and the T-Rex from Jurassic Park movie, except without the kind of squeal. It wasn't that squeal in it like they had on that movie. It was a combination of that, and it roared twice. I thought, I need to wake up the guys. Maybe one of them was stirring. And I thought, as soon as I do, it'll quit. Well, then probably 100 yards from camp, I hear this female scream. It was just a bloody murder blast. You know, mountain lion can sound like a woman screaming for help, but it's weighty. This was just a female blast, and both of them sounded angry. Well, I wake up the guys, but just like I thought, and never did it again. But I don't know how they slept through that one that's close to the camp. That thing vibrated my chest. I don't sleep that easy. But that was in '83, and from that point on, I started reading everything I could find in papers and magazines, and there wasn't a whole lot until the internet came out. And then I'm a radiation therapist, or retired anyway, and I went to work with my sons. They had a trucking company, and I bought a hot shot rig and started driving hot shot oil field. And we go in a lot of desolate areas. You know, just very few people live down in there. And in 2014, I was way out west of Canadian Texas, down along the Canadian River. And I was coming out there, and it was about 8 o'clock in the evening, in the middle of July. So, you know, the sun was still up, it's bright. A little bit overcast clouds, just enough that it wasn't blinding me. And I see what I think is a big, wide, thick-butted bull. Of course, I, grew up raising cattle, and my kids showed cattle, and I've showed cattle, and I'd never seen a bull that thick, especially on a river ranch. They're usually a thin, lanky bull. So I was keeping an eye on him. He wasn't too far off the lease road. He was back behind some plum thickets. And so I kept watching him as I got closer. And the lease road went right around where he was, wide open view. And it was a squatch. And he was sitting down on all fours. And he had a mouthful of plums. He wasn't 70 feet from me. And nothing between me and him. I had a good look at him. And as soon as to tell what it was, I remembered this road curves. If I don't watch the curve, I'm going to go off into a canyon. So I looked up, hit the brakes, and turned around and looked back, and he was already gone. He was out of there. I threw the pickup in park, and I jumped out and was running towards the end of the trailer. And I finally stopped, and I thought, this sucker could use me for a toothpick. And he was twice my width. And even down on all fours, he was almost 5 feet tall. And I'm 6'3", 240, and like I said, he was twice my width. And I've had my boys measure me. When I'm down on all fours like he was, I'm 3 feet tall. So I think that's going to put him in the 9 to 10 foot range. And as wide as he was wide, but he was matted. His chest was matted. That summer was extremely hot. We had a lot of 108-degree days, and he was kind of sun bleached on the chest. But he was a big boy, and I wanted so bad to go out there and take pictures because he was standing in sand. And I thought, there's footprints there. I can get footprints and maybe knuckle prints. But that was early on, and I thought he dropped off in that canyon's where he's at, and he wouldn't be 30 feet from me. So I came home and then with the internet, I started doing a lot more research. But from that point on, just things started happening just all the time. Found out they were around my house, and first thing I noticed was I had a peach tree that was just loaded, and I was waiting every day just to make sure they were ripe before I started picking them. I went out one evening and I thought, they're ready. I'm going to pick them in the morning. And there was about 2 dozen that had fallen down on the ground. And these are huge, big peaches that the juice just runs down the arm when it's biting one. And so I get my stuff ready the next morning. I went out to get it, and they're all gone. There wasn't anything left on the tree, and everything on the ground was taken. And I'm sitting there thinking, the raccoons couldn't carry off 3 or 4 bushels of peaches overnight. I said, something had to have hands. And I just really didn't know what to think. But it was just about the same time I was walking my little schnauzers one night, and I don't let them out by themselves because we have coyotes so bad here. And to the south, I heard the coyotes were fighting over something. Even my lab was sitting there looking in, what are they doing? And then all of a sudden, hear this scream, this huge scream, powerful scream. And then you hear a coyote, sounded like it had been grabbed up and killed because it had that death squall you hear. And then it screamed again and grabbed another one. And my lab went to the house. I thought, there's only one thing that could be. That was squatch. And there were different things were happening along then. Like I was losing dog food, 50 pounds a week. And that rocked along. And I went out to the barn one day. I hadn't checked things out there in a while. And walked into the shed, and I looked up, and there's this huge fingers swiped down across the barn on the wall.
And I was a witness of that because I saw that too.
Yeah.
And the footprint. That was the first footprint I saw.
Yeah. Well, I was walking up to that handprint, and I stopped because I thought there's got to be a footprint. And I looked straight down, and there was a 18-inch by 6.5-inch track. And that's when I believe Sibylla got a hold of you, Chuck. I had you come out, and you saw all this, and got your opinion of everything that was going on. We had handprints, we had footprints, we had the handprints inside the barn, and there was proof of 3 at that point because we found little handprints in the mud under the shed, big handprint inside the barn, and that handprint drag across the barn was 7.5 feet as I measured it. And what it looked like it was going on, there was a sliding door there. It was reaching through the sliding door, grabbing at something. And it just swiped down the side of the barn. But Chuck said right below that, you could see like a shoulder marks from one. That was at the 6.5 to 7 feet mark. And
yeah, I was going to say, Barry, that's about the time that you got a hold of me, and I came out there. You were showing me all this stuff, and I thought, holy cow, he's got them on this property.
Yeah, that was a shock to me. And, of course, I didn't know what was going on. So you said the same thing. Y'all asked if there's anything unusual happening. I said, I'm hearing explosions once a week for the last month. And it was always between 2 and 3 in the morning. And the big one was, it happened a lot, but there was one night, it brought me out of the bed. I bounced out of bed. My bedroom's in the second floor of the old house. And I called the sheriff's department because I thought there was an explosion somewhere. And they had no reports of explosions. And I told him what had been happening every week for the last month. And he thought, well, that was weird. Yeah, I did too. And when y'all asked me if anything unusual had happened, I told you about the explosions. And then Chuck, you asked me, he said, do you have anything they could be eating? I said, no, nothing I know of. He said, what about dog food? I said, oh, the dog out there in the barn, there's a dog run and a big building that she stays in, and I got to still feed her in there. And I'd feed her once a week. But I had been having trouble. By middle of the week, all the feed's gone. And she had gotten real skinny. And he said, well, what about trash? And I said, yeah, I've got a dumpster. He said, yeah, that's when they picked it up. And I said, it's usually a Monday or Tuesday. It's just a local thing, and they pick it up when they get time. And he said, so by Tuesday, you're out of dog feed and trash. I said, yeah. He said, they're upset because they're out of anything to eat, so they're coming up and hitting the house. So we go up the house, and on the back side of the house is bricked. And before we bricked it, I dug a 2x2 footing for the brick to set on because I didn't want the brick or anything to crack. But we looked up at about 7.5 feet, and there was a crack running down the water. But above that crack, the brick was crumbled, like something had hit it. And that's what I really was. And that's where my dog feed had been going for 2 years. They were coming in and getting it at night. Now, through the winter, it would stop. I'd turn on heat lamps in there, and, feed wouldn't disappear until next spring when I turned the heat lamps off. Until that last year, before the tornado, they started throwing tree branches in and knocking out the heat lamps. And I didn't know what was going on, but why is this branch in here? It hadn't been blowing. And that happened twice. I put the bulb back in, and then there was another one thrown in. And my chain link fence had been pushed down, and not like cattle, they'll push under it or go over the top and push it in. But then there was any cattle tracks in the dog run. It was hard packed, but cattle would still mark. Hooves will dig in. But, there was no sign cattle had even been in there until,
well, Barry,
yeah.
Didn't you tell me one time that the lab that was out there, didn't he come out and cover up the food bowl and put dirt over it?
Yes, he started digging the food out and burying it, and then putting his pan on top of it. Because he got where he didn't want to use the self-feeder.
Right.
And I couldn't figure out why there's scent on it. Because that happened later on, which I'll talk about, with the lab in the doghouse. Yeah, she was covering up the dog food and just starving to death. They figured out how to knock out that light, and then they go in. And at night, some nights, before we knew what was going on, we'd hear her whining out there like she was scared.
Hmm.
I even drove out there one night just to see what was wrong. Of course, they were gone, and I didn't see any sign of them. That was before I knew it, but they never did hurt any of the dogs. Never bothered them.
Barry, when was this happening?
That was about 2016, 17, that era. And then it ended in 17 when I had that tornado in May. But now the month before that was having all kinds of activity here. It was just nuts. It was almost nightly. One night I went out and walked the dogs to the north side of the house, and then the barn is out east of there. And I've always carried a spotlight out there when I'm out at night. And I felt like I was being watched. My hair on the back of my neck was standing up. And I whirled around and turned that light on at the barn, and there was one standing in front of the barn staring at me. And as soon as I lit him up, he turned to his right and was just gone, just took off. No sound, no nothing. About 150 feet. And even up in front of the house, if the cows were running and kicking, you could hear them run through there. But I didn't hear him. And I was telling my dad about it, and he said, how big was he? I said, well, he was as tall as to the roof line, and that roof line's 10 feet. And he was covering up a 4-foot window. And he said, what do you think he weighed? Well, we had a dairy, and we had Holsteins, and our Holsteins were big. And they weigh in from 12 to 1,500, pretty typical. And I said, if you stood one of them up, that would be pretty close, except the Bigfoot had a whole lot bigger chest. And I'd say he's got to be at least in that 1,200 at the minimum. He was just massive.
That's big.
What time of year is this?
Excuse me?
What
That was in the spring.
spring?
And I
Okay.
think that was I'd have to look at my records. But I think that was the spring of 17 early. Because right after that, no, that was earlier than that. Because I had the one that came after me.
Spider crawler.
Was after the spider crawler came after me, but it was after that, but wasn't too long after it. You know, my ex came out to pick up some mail one night. It was about 10 o'clock, and we were at her car outside talking, and she asked me what some little one sounded like that I'd heard. And so I did a distressed baby cry because he was upset. He could see me, and I was in the yard light. He was really upset. And I did that distressed baby cry. And immediately I just had a bad feeling and gut feeling that I shouldn't have done that. You know, this is not good. And it creeped her out. She left. And I noticed my lab go running to the fence, all big and bad, going to get something. And all of a sudden, he ducked his tail and ran the house as fast as he could. So I shined my spotlight straight out to where he was at. And I could see him then. That sucker was crawling, coming at me just as fast as he could. I got to see about 3 or 4 strides he made at me. And I had a pretty good look at him because when I first saw him, he was about 150 feet from me. But he had closed the gap pretty good coming at me. And he was a silver one. His wingspan was probably about 9 feet. And his head was about the size of a 5-gallon bucket. And those huge red eyes were just shining with that light hitting it. But I could see his teeth. Yeah, there was a glare. But it was grimacing. I could see his teeth, but he wasn't happy. He wasn't a happy camper.
Barry, if you would describe the spider crawl that he did.
Okay, it's his arms were straight out to the side. His legs were behind him, but he was like he was swimming. He'd bring arms up one at a time, but when he bring like an arm up, you'd see a back knee come up as it was raising that leg up and then pushing off. And it was just like he was swimming at me. And he was probably still 10 inches off the ground from his chest. It was all on fingertips and toes. And like I said, he was fast. There was no way, even when I was young, I could outrun him. he was covering a lot of ground. And the one part of it took me a while to figure out how to tell people just how big he was. Standing up, like I said, I'm 6'3". His head, falling like that, was above my waist, the top of his head. He was old, but he was big. But that hair, it was so silver, and it was fairly long, maybe 4 inches, 5 inches. But it just flowed when he'd bring his arms around. It was gorgeous hair. But he was an happy camper. But luckily the spotlight was bright enough that he turned and went behind the house. Then after that, we had bad storms here one night, about 10 o'clock, and it knocked out all power. There wasn't any lights anywhere around here. And I went to bed, and I had to get up pretty early to go on a hot shot run. I had to get up at like 4. And just as I was waking up, I hear these whoops right in the backyard. I mean, right in the backyard. I thought, uh-oh, they're here. And I heard the little one. I heard what I thought was a female. And then I heard the bigger sounding whoop. And I got ready. I thought, I've got to go start the pickup. My remote had quit, the remote start, and I didn't want to go outside. And about that time, I hear that siren go off. And it just sounded just like a siren. But it was right in my backyard, and it was loud. I thought, oh my goodness, I need to leave. And I thought, oh, I've got that. My other pickup had a remote start, and it has glass packs on it. It was loud. So I fired it up, and lights come on it. And then I went out and started up my pickup. Well, they were gone by then because I shined the lights all through out there, and I never did see them. And I think, Chuck, you came out right after that.
Yeah.
You came out and we sat out there, and about the time we were starting to think we had some activity out here, the neighbors were having a fish fry about 2 miles from me,
Yeah.
and they exploded that tannerite.
Right.
And come to find out, it was 24 pounds of tannerite they blew up. You remember that shock wave we saw go across the country?
Yeah.
People thought we had an earthquake. And then, right before that, too, I'd gone on a run to Houston, but I went out on the pump house, had a flat roof, and I put those 5 glass beads, kind of a oval shape. I put them in a straight line, just straight row. And then I had a metal necklace, kid's necklace. It was fairly long, and it had metal feathers on it. And I laid that stretched out. Well, I'll go down to Houston, and I was down there a couple of days and got back, and I thought I'd go see what was happened to it. Well, I walked up to the pump house, and there was a bead gone. That little glass bead was gone, but the 4 had been moved in the shape of a square, just beside each other like a square. And the necklace had been picked up and then laid back down, kind of wrinkled up. But they took that one bead. And that's when I called you, and you came out. And we were walking up to that pump house, and you hollered at me, "Stop!"
Right.
It was a 17-inch track right there in front of it.
Yeah.
And then that was that weekend. And then Tuesday, when the tornado came through and rearranged everything.
Right.
But there for the last month or so, the activity just got nuts. But I was out there, and I'd heard this old Cherokee said that they understand Cherokee. So I thought I'd get the bright idea and looked up what friend meant in Cherokee. Also looked up at what it meant in Cheyenne. And so I was out there, and I knew they were at the shed because I could hear them kind of scuffling around. And my lab, he knew they were there because he was watching out there, and he was staying close to me. And so I was out in the backyard, and I just said, Okanali real fast in Cherokee. And from that point on, there was activity almost every night out there. And they seemed to get closer and closer. So back up just a little bit, and I'll talk about on Little Bit's doghouse. This was February that year. I got home about 11 o'clock one night, and it was misty, freezing rain, and I didn't want to set his dog food outside, so I just filled up this can that holds over 2 gallons of dog food, and I just shoved it out the backside of their doghouse. Well, I guess the next morning, the lab and the little dog that his buddies, they were over in the corner of the yard, curled up. I thought, what are you doing out here? It's freezing. It's ice everywhere. I looked out, and that feed pan was upside down out in the yard, and there was no dog feed anywhere. Nothing. So I assumed the Bigfoot was on the other side of that little building next to the house.
Mm-hmm.
They must have been watching me from there because that's the only spot they could see me from. And they saw me say, put that dog food in there. So they came up underneath the yard light and took that out. And from that point on, the dogs would not sleep in that house. After the tornado, I took it and bleached it and let it air out for a week. And then I took it and put it in his new pen, and he walked up and sniffed it. And he stuck his head in and sniffed. But he wouldn't sleep in it till the other dog went in. And then after that, he started sleeping in it again. But he wanted to make sure that scent was gone. That was an interesting time before the tornado. They've been here a few times, but not just a whole lot, not like it was before. I've seen them, I don't know, 5-6 times, and I've heard them quite a bit. It's not as active here as it was. I think I had a couple of times this year that they've been around, but I couldn't see them. But, Little Bit knew they were around. And then I told you the other day that Rick was here, and I made one of the calls, and instantly to the south and southwest had owls hooting. And then to the northeast over in the creek, one was hooting. And, that's a half-mile distance in either direction. And they were fairly loud. And they was like they were communicating back and forth from each other. And I don't think they were owls. I think they were trying to figure out who was making that call.
Well, Rick,
Rick,
let's talk about how you got interested in this.
Really? I got to follow that?
Yes, you do.
Oh, my gosh. What are you doing to me? Killing me here. Well, I have always been interested in the unknown. Never really went out and started looking for it or anything. But when Barry and I was hunting up there on the Washita River, it's probably a good thing he didn't tell me what he thought that stuff was, because I would have packed my bags and left right there. I'd been out there. So it's probably a good thing he didn't tell me. Later on, I lost my wife to a brain tumor, so I started riding with Barry. I called him one day, and he sounded sleepy, and I said, "Where are you at?" And he's coming back from Odessa or Jalna, Mexico somewhere, and he was tired, so I talked to him for a couple of hours till he got almost home. So one day I asked him, I said, "Well, can I ride with you?" And he said, "Yeah, the boys don't care." Do you remember what year that was, Barry?
Yeah, 16, 17.
That's
before
about when I was thinking.
Yeah, it was right after the tornado, because it was June 17 when you heard your first one, because my RV had moved down to the shop house after the tornado, and you came out to listen.
Yeah,
and I'll never forget that night.
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
The night that you guys were out on the hunting trip and you saw the red eye shine, give us an estimate of how tall that sucker was that was out there.
Well, I said that's a pretty good size possum, and he's getting ready to get nosebleed if he keeps going. He was going up that tree, but dummy me, I should have known that a possum don't look one eye around the tree and then stop and close it, and then turn and look one eye around the tree again at you. And it was big. And where you're talking, it was 10 foot, had to be 9 to 10 foot. And I'm basing that on the height of a basketball goal, because it was way up there. And then I heard those. I'm sitting in a tree up there on the Westall River. That first part that Barry was saying that we were up there hunting. I'm sitting there and I got up and I found a good spot. Had a trail coming through there and got in there, dark. I'm up in there, didn't even have to. It was big and wide, and I could stand down in between them. It was like 12, 14 inches. Plenty of room. I could just put my boots down in, and I'm 5, 6 feet off the ground. Perfect ground blind or tree blind. All of a sudden, I hear I went, holy mackerel. I thought, that gummit, I've got some Oriental people in here. Was the first thing I thought of. And they're, what are they tramping around in the dark? And about that time, I hear something move. This come kind of from, like I was facing the east. It come from the southwest. Well, over at the southeast, something moved. But it just moved and didn't make enough sound. Just a few minutes later, it gets light enough. There's the biggest buck I ever seen. Takes off. I guess I moved and looked over, and there it was. It was laying down right there in front of me, not 15 yards from me. And when they started making those sounds, it stood up, that buck. And then whenever it got daylight, and I wiggled and turned, and I made a sound, and it bolted in the way it took off. But I didn't know what those sounds were. I had no clue. Well, I was riding with Barry one day, and he said, Rick, he's going to tell you something. I said, okay, what? He said, I'm a Bigfoot researcher. I said, really? Yeah, and everything. And I told him, I said, Barry, I was born in Arkansas and then moved to Oklahoma, but I was too close to Missouri, so I'm one of those guys you got to show me. I mean, I got to see it to believe it. I said, you never lied to me that I know of. But I said, and I'm not calling you a liar because I wouldn't. But I said, I got to see one. And I said, boy, I wish I could see one then. He looked at me and he said, don't wish for something unless you really want it. And so he said, well, you know how you look for deer? And I said, yeah. He said, well, don't do that. So he started telling me to look in the dark spots, and be looking for, I was always looking for a back line of the back of a deer. He said, start looking for rounded head humps and stuff like that. So I did. It wasn't, I don't know, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, Barry, something like that.
Yeah, 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, I was thinking 3. I was coming from Oklahoma City, being up seeing my grandkids, and I'm coming down through there, and I'm slowing down because there's trucks in front of me, and I'm getting ready to drop off her, and that's over by my grandson. Anyway, yeah. I'm going through there, and I just looked over to the northwest, and there's a little valley. Chuck, I looked up there, and there's a Bigfoot walking. It was getting dark. The sun had gone down, but yet it was plenty of light. Walking up to there, and let me tell you what, I was not prepared for the size of that thing. After bouncing off for 2 or 3 semis and a car behind me, they must have thought I was the craziest driver. I was all over that road. I was trying to look and trying to stay in the road, looking at it, and I'm screaming and yelling. I'm glad I was by myself, but got in there. I called Barry. All I could say was, big black gingerbread man. Big black gingerbread man. That's all I could say. Because it looked like a big, huge black gingerbread walking across that thing. And he was carrying something because arms weren't swinging. I could see the elbows, and they were equal across above his waist. And so I figured it must have been carrying a deer or something going across there. And I went, I called Barry, and I was on cloud 9. So here, 3 weeks prior to that, I wished I would see one, and I started looking. And I've been seeing them ever since. And I'm the type of guy like Barry and I, when we hunted, if I couldn't confirm that I saw antlers or a head on a deer or the backside of the white tail, I saw something move through the trees. If I couldn't confirm it was a deer, I didn't call it a deer because we would count the deer. Well, I'm the same way. I've seen stuff through the trees, and I've seen stuff move, but I couldn't see it enough to verify what it was. So I don't say, hey, yeah, I saw Bigfoot. I don't do that. And people, I think, have seen Bigfoot and did not realize it. And I'll give you an example of that. I went and spent Christmas Eve with my grandson. We had Christmas morning with him. I'd had Christmas Eve with my kids. So with him, I was up the city anyway, so I just went on over to his house and stayed with him. Got up that morning. Well, they had to leave and be gone by noon. So I'm getting ready. Well, he lives out in the country right on the corner. He lives on the northwest corner of this place. Well, I got in there at night and didn't realize across the street, the road right south of him, they was clearing out a bunch of these thorn bushes and all that stuff. They were leaving the trees, but was doing the other stuff about it. Well, he was surrounded by trees all the way around. And I'd heard those sounds before at his house, so I'll get into that first after I get into this. So anyway, I load up. Well, I saw his pickup out there. He's a volunteer fireman. And I thought, why did he leave his pickup? I bet he's here. Because he usually don't leave his wife stranded if he gets called out to a fire. Well, about that time, and he has a very distinct sound that nobody else can make it sound like him. So I'm looking around. Look, he had a 20 by 20 or 10 by 20 cabin over there a little bit for a storage room. I looked around, it wasn't there, and I couldn't find him. I swore that was him, But I had looked out, and there was 2 evergreen trees right straight south. I thought, why in the world would they clear those out and leave those 2 evergreen trees there? They need to be, because they're just like gasoline, And then I heard that sound. So I went in, got my second load, loaded up, started out. I looked up. There's only one evergreen tree standing over there.
Ooh.
One of them had moved. So I backed up, parked, got out, and stood in the same spot to make sure I could see, and it was not there. The one out in the open beside a tree was there, but the one that was back into the trees further back was gone. Well, I don't think that was the one that made the sound. About 40 yards west of his house is a tree road, and it was cleared all out, and on the west side of it is all trees, slopes down into a pond, and there's trees all on the south side of the road. I think they were traveling along that fence row over there and went across the road, and I think there was one probably 30, 40 yards from me made that sound because he heard my grandson say that. So people can see that. Well, back to that deal. That was in December. Back in May, I had told my grandson, I said, I said, what's across that southwest side of your place over? He said, it's a solid square mile of nothing but trees. No houses, nothing. But he said, right down here, the school put a little pig barn and some pig pens there, so the school would have a place to put their pigs. I said, they ever have their food out there? Yeah, that's okay. So I told him I heard them arguing, Bigfoot arguing, and it sounded like they were mad. And he said, well, when I heard them a week prior to that, they had taken all the pigs up, taken everything out because school was out. It was the end of May. And they'd come in to find food, and it wasn't there. And a little puppy that I went out to let go to the bathroom, he heard that sound. He looked over, he's 8, 9 weeks old, raised one leg up, pointed, turned around and run back up, got up right beside me, pressing up against me, trying to get behind me. And then he run to the door. He was ready to get in there. He knew that sound was not good for him. The little puppy knew that.
Huh.
So I decided I better tell my grandson about this because I got a great granddaughter that she's just about a year old. So I told him about that. Well, he said he'd wished he could see one. Well, this couple of months later, we're down on the South Canadian River. We had five four-wheelers that we had, and there was probably 14, 15, 16 people in those five, because two of them could hold six. And we're going to make a day of it. We had our ice chest, and we'd make sandwiches. Well, we pulled out on a sandbar, a huge sandbar. About 12:30, 1 o'clock, and we decided we're going to make sandwiches. And back behind us over there, maybe 40, 45 yards, was the brush. So I just happened to look, and I thought, man, that looks like a doorway. Something's been going through there, because it was all pretty thick, and then it kind of was open going back. And I looked, and I could see in the very far back was another evergreen tree. And then I looked, and I thought, oops, the second one's not an evergreen tree. So my grandson was there, and I said, hey, you said you would like to see a Bigfoot, would you? And he said, his eyes got big, and he said, is there one looking at us? I said, yeah. He said, where? And he's going, his eyes look like silver dollars, you know. and he's like 6'2", and he's not a little kid. He's a big old boy. And I said, I want to tell you, listen to me. And I said, don't you turn around slow. I said, in the back over there in the brush, it looks like a doorway. It looks like two evergreen trees, one to the right and one a little bit to the left. He said, yeah, okay. I looked, and he said, oh, yeah. He said, I see it. And I think I do. And he's looking at it, and I said, you see that one? I said, that's not an evergreen tree. When did you ever see an evergreen tree with slanted shoulders like that and rounded head? And he went, oh, my gosh. And I said, he turned and looked at me, and he said, now, you mean that? I said, no, don't point. And he pointed at it. And he had turned and blocked my view. I stepped to the side. He looked back at me, and he said, what? I said, I told you not to point. He said, well, why? And I said, look back at the doorway. He whirled around at me, was pale white, and he said, that left evergreen tree's gone. I said, yeah, that was not an evergreen tree. That was a Bigfoot. He was so excited, he couldn't hardly believe it. So he decided, I'm going to go over there. Let's go over there. And I said, you sure? And he said, yeah, I want to go in there after you. I said, okay. So we got in the four-wheeler, drove over there, and he gets over and he stops, and he goes, I said, mark how tall he was. And he did. He had it marked where he saw the head. He gets over and he looks down. I said, what's the matter? He calls me Bobo. He says, Bobo, that thing's bigger than I thought he was. And he's taller. I said, what do you mean? I said, I thought this 2-foot thing here was the bank. It was raised 2 foot higher, and it was just a different colored grass. He said, I don't think I want to go in there. He said, that thing is big. So he was 2 foot tall, taller than he thought he was, because he wasn't standing. He was on ground zero where we were at, but he was 8 to 9 foot tall. You know, he decided he didn't want to get in there. So see, there we were, and we were the only two that saw it. The other 14 people looked at where we were pointing and looked. They didn't see anything. Nobody said anything. They would have left with those kids there. But people are around them all the time,
yeah,
and they never see them. They don't ever see them.
I got a question for both of you guys. You know, my very first sighting was back when I was working in the oil patch, and I know, Barry, you and Rick go to a lot of oil field places.
Oh yeah.
And you've seen a lot of Bigfoot in those type of areas.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So my question, and this has always kind of fascinated me, why do you think that they kind of tend to come to those locations? And I have a theory that they sometimes go into those places because they know there's minerals there.
I think a lot of it is curiosity.
You think it's curiosity?
Yeah. They got trash back there. I don't know if they throw food there or not. I don't know if they can smell it over the minerals. And you know, Do you ever remember the first time you smelled diesel or gasoline? Oh, it smelled, as a kid, it smelled good. So that could be what they could be drawn to that, smelling of that too. Because, I mean, we were on a rig site. We went off down southeastern Oklahoma, down Tuttle, down in there somewhere. Barry, you may remember. I've been on so many of them, I can't keep track of them. Barry, he's like a Melvin. He can remember them all. But we just went up on this little hill, and was right up against the fence. It was just right there. So I'm sitting there, and I mean, I'm up looking off to the southeast. Trees are all down through there. The wind blowing 35, 40 miles an hour. It was coming up through there. Now, there was something wrong. You remember that one rig that kept screeching? They were putting it up. I think they were setting it up, remember?
They were setting it up, and they was making all kinds of racket and screeching. And
it was screeching. It's horrible. Well, I'm sitting through there. I ended up having to take my hearing aids out because, I mean, it was tearing my ears up. I look over to the southeast, and I'm watching these trees just swirl around. And there's one looked like a regular tree, and these others. The others looked like kind of like yearlings or something. This was a pretty good sized tree. They're swirling in every direction. When that would start screeching, that tree would go west, back to the east, west, back to the east. And they would stop, and it would quit. I'm going, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? That was a Bigfoot. He was mad, and he was taking it out on that tree, and he was pushing it. But then when he stopped, the trees kept swirling, but that big tree just kind of bent with them and bent toward the north because the wind was coming out of the southwest, and it would bend to the north, kind of northeast a little bit. Then they'd start screeching again, and there he'd go. He'd go clear over to the west, and then it'd bend clear back to the east. And I mean, it was going way over and way back and forth. That Bigfoot was that close to these people. He wasn't, I bet he wasn't 60, 70 yards from us.
So he was pushing the tree toward the rig?
Well, no. The rig was kind of northwest from him, but he was pushing it toward the west and toward the east, where the wind was blowing toward the northeast. That's where the wind was, but it was blowing up through that little valley. So it was just a little sloping little valley there, had trees all in it. We were down there where trees was everywhere. But it's like
they were pretty good sized trees.
Yeah. This wasn't no little bitty one. If it was a little one, he would have probably pulled it up and threw it at us, probably. But he didn't like the sound of that screeching. You know it had to have been hurting his ears.
Yeah.
So I think he was maybe coming up there. They were putting it in. He was curious, and then they started that screeching.
Yeah. I kind of think that they're curious about the locations. I've always, when we get through on a location and they moved everything off, I walk around to these spots where there's stuff spilled just to see if I can see tracks or fingers and I've never seen anything right up on the location. But I really think they're curious, and then like they're always cooking on those locations. You know, they've got.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, they're always cooking there. And they bring in those big grills on trailers.
Yeah.
Catering the cookout, and it smells so good. But I've noticed things with the dog man. You know,
but you were on a rig
hang around.
Yeah. Well, there's food too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chuck, we were on a rig. I think we was just over in Texas, up by Shattuck, up in there somewhere in that area. And Barry pulled me up, and I'm sitting there going. He pulls me right up on the very south end of the rig because they had to unload pipe and load it right there. And I'm looking down into a valley with trees, and it was starting to get dark. Luckily, I had my binoculars. This is one of the closest I got to look at at the face of a Bigfoot. And I'm sitting there looking, and I thought, all of a sudden I looked down kind of southwest, and I'm looking, I thought, boy, that area looks a little bit darker, blacker than the rest of the. So I grabbed my binoculars up, went in through there, and then I see an eye shine. And he was peeking around the tree on the right side of the tree, and I could see his right eye, which would be to my left, but it'd be his right eye. He's looking at me, and I'm going, wow, I can see it. And then he moved back, and he went real slow, went to the left side of the tree, and was looking with his left eye out. And he sat there, and he just went back and forth. And I was so excited because it was getting dark, and I was afraid I wasn't going to keep seeing him. And then he turned after he did that a couple of times. He turned and walked real slow, and I could see him walk away, and then just about the second step away, I couldn't see him because he went into the darkness. But he was there at that rig, looking at that rig, and he wasn't even probably 50 yards from me.
Hey, Rick.
Into the trees. Yes.
Did you get the feeling that he knew you were looking at him?
I think he did, because he was acting shy, for lack of better words, because he just looked over to the right, and he'd look at me, and then he'd lean and kind of like hide behind that tree, because the tree was pretty wide. It was a big tree. And then he'd lean around and look to the left one like, oh, I don't want you to see me, but I'm curious of what's going on up there. And I'm sitting here looking at my binoculars at 50 yards away. Of course, it was getting dark, but the binoculars pick up light where you can really see really good. And man, that was just so neat to sit and watch that. But I'll tell you another thing that was neat. Yeah.
Tell them about the one we saw that you saw at we were southeast of Camargo after the fire burned everything off, and I was on the.
That's the one I was getting ready to say.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that was the one. When I was at, here's another neat one. They had fires here. What was that, a couple of years ago or something? When we first had them,
that bad.
They were fires.
Yeah, that bad fire.
Bad. They'd come into Oklahoma bad. We were. Barry said, I got to run. I said, okay. So I went up through there, and I mean, it was fires everywhere, still going, smoke. Well, we went off down on this river it's burnt. We pulled up on this rig, and it's burnt black all the way around. I had my binoculars with, and I'm facing the north, and I'm going, wow, Burnsville, here it is. Everything's burnt in front of me. And I looked over on the ridge over there. It was pretty good distance. So I just picked my binoculars up, and I went, oh, and it was a small Bigfoot, like a monkey, swinging on these mesquite trees. And it would just swing and grab it. And a lot of times his feet wasn't even hitting the ground. He'd reach out and grab another limb. I'm going, you got to be kidding me. I said, I've never seen that was my first little one. And he probably looked like he was maybe 4 or 5 foot tall, something like that. And he was swinging through the trees. And if the trees had not been burnt, I would have never seen him, because he was far enough away that I would not have been able to see him. But all that was there was the trees and the burnt, and everything else was burnt off. And I'm sitting there looking, and he dropped down, stopped, and he looked to the northeast and dropped on all fours and went off down that hill and was gone. So I guess his mom was over that way, and she called to him to come, because he was coming kind of angling toward the rig a little bit, But he was swinging from those little branches and tree limbs, just playing, having a good little time, just like a kid would do over there. And I thought to me, that was fascinating to see that. Is that the one, Barry?
Yep.
Yeah, that one was awesome.
Thank you for listening to our Part 1 interview with Barry and Rick. Please tune in next week for Part 2. As always, take care, y'all.